So, I mean, maybe we're at a moment here where we're going to make an advance. It's been a long, dark period of, I mean, not that long ago we were talking about privatizing Social Security, privatized accounts, and now suddenly we're talking about expanding it. So it's a roller coaster, but I think there's a moment now. And so, I mean, a couple other points to add on to what Nancy said about the importance of Social Security. It's literally the greatest anti-poverty program that we've had in the United States. 3/4 of Americans depend heavily on it in their retirement years. Nearly half would be living in poverty without Social Security. It's especially important to women and racial minorities, providing 90% of more of income for 55% of elderly Hispanics, 49% of African Americans, 42% of Asian Americans. So this is a core part of who, not only retirement, but of who we are as a society. And given that, what we're realizing is that the problem with Social Security is not bankruptcy, as some have tried to say. It's that it doesn't pay enough. Because if you look at how much of final income Social Security replaces, it replaces about 35% of your final income. But all the experts tell you you're going to need twice that amount in order to retire. So where is it going to come from? Well, historically, it's come from what they call the three-legged stool of retirement security. Social Security being one leg, but the others being company pensions, and the others being company pensions, and also what tried to replace them, 401ks and IRAs and what have you, and then private savings, which was focused around home ownership. Well, 2 out of 3 of these legs have become extremely wobbly. Company pensions are almost gone. 401ks turned out, well, there's a lot we can say about that, but you obviously can't put much into your 401k if earnings aren't high enough to save. And we know that the wages of American workers have been flat for 25, 30 years. And then home ownership, well, look what happened in the housing market. Turns out owning a home is a rather risky venture. So we need something more stable, more secure, and that would be expanding Social Security. Build on what works, what we know works, instead of what has failed. That's the idea behind it. So the idea here is the obvious solution is expanding Social Security now. And what I've proposed in my book, Expand Social Security Now, is doubling the monthly benefit. And I'm going to show you how we can pay for that. And this is just almost an exercise in showing that there is multiple ways to pay for it. This is just a matter of priority. It's about where we are as a society and where we want to put the wealth that is generated by our economy. Bernie Sanders has a proposal out there. It would add about $68 per month per beneficiary. I think that would be a great start, but it doesn't really deal with this collapse of this three-legged stool that I spoke about earlier. So double it, double the payout, which would bring the U.S. retirement system closer to many of the retirement systems used in other developed countries. I call this system Social Security Plus. How much would it cost to double monthly benefits? Can everybody see this okay back there? It would cost about $662 billion a year. It's a lot of money. How are we going to come up with that? Well, I'm going to show you how. First thing we do is eliminate the payroll cap. Payroll cap, as many of you know, is something that above $118,500 annual income, you don't get taxed anymore for Social Security purposes. So what that means is that wealthy people pay a lower percentage of their income towards Social Security than do their secretaries, their chauffeurs, and what have you. So by lifting this payroll cap, we would raise approximately $135 billion towards our goal of $662 billion. The next thing we would do is 1% subsidies on investment income. Let's take a look at that. There's a lot of tax shelters and loopholes for 1%er households and businesses that have to do with investment income. Things like capital gains and other types of investment income mostly benefit wealthier people. These are federal subsidies for affluent people, basically. And, we've talked a lot about should we raise income tax on people. which is certainly a valid discussion to have. But the interesting thing is that a lot of wealthy people don't really get their income from wage income. So you can increase the income tax and it won't affect a huge amount of their income because they're getting it through investment income, capital gains. And so that's why these other parts that have usually, a lot of people say we need to tax the wealthy more. These sorts of things have been sort of overlooked. Capital gains, what we're talking about is if you have a salary of $500,000, you're subject to the top income tax rate of 39.6%. But if you get that save $500,000 through investment income, through capital gains, you're only paying about half that amount in tax. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that this rule cost the federal treasury approximately $161 billion in 2013. So that's $161 billion that we could claw back for Social Security purposes. 93% of this subsidy is taken by Americans in the top 20% income bracket, 70% by Americans in the top 1% bracket. Another one called step up in basis, inherited wealth. What step up in basis is, let's say you sell a big asset like a home. You pay taxes on it, capital gains tax. That is the difference between the amount you bought it for and the amount you're selling it for. But if you inherit that property, when you sell it, you pay the difference between the amount it was worth at the time you inherited it, not when it was first purchased, and then the amount that you sell it for. This reduces federal revenues by about $63 billion. CBO estimates that this step up in basis, or I call it step up in privilege, really, this rule will reduce federal revenues by $644 billion over 10 years. 21% of that subsidy goes to the top 1% of income earners. 65% goes to the top 20%. Bottom 40% gets 3% of these benefits. Of the more than 200 federal tax expenditures in the individual and corporate income tax system, this is one of the 10 largest. Then we have another type of investment income called carried interest loophole. The carried interest loophole, if you're a hedge fund manager, you make money two ways. One, you get a 2% fee for managing the billions of dollars in your hedge fund, and then also you take 20% of the profits that your investment portfolio makes. And both of these types of income are taxed as capital gains, not as wage income. Even though in most cases, for most hedge fund managers, none of their money is at risk because they're using other people's money for their hedge funds. So the people who benefit are the richest. In 2014, the top 25 hedge fund managers together earned $12 billion, average of $465 million apiece. They paid the second lowest average federal tax rate since data has been collected, only 6.7%. Mitt Romney, our favorite hedge fund manager, only paid 14% tax rate because of these sorts of rules. The carried interest loophole cost the federal treasury about $18 billion a year. So we take all these different types of income and we're now putting them into the Social Security Plus Fund that's going to pay for the doubling of our pensions, of our Social Security monthly benefit. Third, now as outrageous as the things that we've been talking about is, as a matter of fact, this investment income isn't taxed at all for Social Security purposes. We're just talking about whether it's taxed at all for income tax purposes of any means. But none of this income, and it is their income, right? All of you are paying 6.2% on your earned income that goes into Social Security, and your employer is paying 6.2% as well. None of these types of capital gains investment income contributes into the Social Security treasury. So wealthy people make zero Social Security contributions based on their investment income. And this is unlike Medicare, for example. Medicare gets a 3.8% tax applied to capital gains of taxpayers with adjusted gross incomes above $200,000 for singles and $250,000 for couples. So these people do pay into the Medicare fund, but they're not paying into the Social Security fund. If the $800 billion in capital gains tax was taxed for Social Security purposes at 6.2%, that would add another $50 billion for Social Security Plus. Then step up in basis, same thing. None of the income that they earn from step up in basis is taxed for 6.2% for Social Security. If we did that, that would add another $19 billion to the trust fund. If we did that for carried interest, $90 billion in carried interest income from 2004, if that had been subject to the 6.2% Social Security payroll tax, that would have yielded another $5.6 billion for the Social Security tax fund. Now, keep in mind, all I'm doing in this exercise is taxing investment income, that the wealthiest people is where a lot of their income comes from. In fact, Larry Summers, he had this incredible number that said that more than 50% of wealth of the richest people has never been subject to any kind of tax like this. So if we were just taxing that income the same way our income is taxed, we would raise a ton of money. We would get ourselves close to the amount we need to double the Social Security monthly benefit. Another source of revenue for Social Security Plus. All businesses that supply things like pensions and other types of retirement vehicles for their employees, they receive a deduction, a federal deduction for this. Well, if we're going to double the monthly benefit, we don't really have a need for employers to provide retirement the way they've been doing for so many years. And fewer and fewer employers are doing this anyway. This type of pension system, private company pensions are being slowly phased out in many ways anyway. So if we took that income back from the amount that they get, we could put that into the Social Security tax fund. That's another $100 billion per year that would go into the Social Security Plus fund. So at this point, we've nearly reached the $662 billion we need to double the monthly benefit. But there are other places that we can look. I think a lot of the places I've talked about that we could get broad agreement on, even Donald Trump has talked against the carried interest loophole and some of these other loopholes in his own sort of, inimical way, talking about these hedge fund managers don't deserve any of this income that they make. So, I mean, we might be able to build some consensus across party lines, across the aisle on these sorts of things. But I'm going to talk about some other ways of raising this income that I think we really need to think seriously about and rethink how it's worked in our system. And that's the 401ks, IRAs, and even home ownership, which it turns out in all these different ways, all these were set up quite a few years ago to become vehicles that would help people save. And now that we have several decades of experience with these, we can see unequivocally that it's wealthier Americans that benefit from these far more than middle class or poor Americans. Individual retirement savings. The federal government spends about $165 billion a year subsidizing individual retirement savings for 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, all these sorts of things. Nearly 80% of this money goes to the top 20% of income earners. The middle class and poor can really take advantage of these deductions because they don't earn enough to save. So they're not benefiting. And even if we set up, there's been proposals now, President Obama and others have talked about setting up a universal 401k, because the other problem with 401ks is that there wasn't universal access. Some businesses and companies set them up, others didn't. Even if we had universal access, it doesn't really help a whole lot if you're not earning enough to put into the 401k or the IRA. It's just really simple. Home ownership. Federal subsidy for the home mortgage interest deduction, $70 billion per year. And that's this is kind of, in the American story, this is kind of apple pie stuff. Home ownership, piece of the rock. This is what a lot of people aspired for. Americans at top 10% income bracket take 80% of this federal subsidy. This is not benefiting the middle class that much. Most people who take their home mortgage interest deduction in their taxes in the middle class, the amount they're getting back is very small. Another homeowner subsidy. Homeowners, there's a federal tax deduction for homeowners to mitigate the cost of state and local property taxes that they pay on their houses. This costs the federal budget another $32 billion. CBO says Americans in the upper 20% take 80% of this federal subsidy. Even more homeowner subsidy. Homeowners also do not have to pay taxes on up to $250,000 of their capital gains profits when they sell their home, which doubles to $500,000 for married taxpayers. That exclusion is another $52 billion, and that also, most of it goes to the upper 20% income earners. Together, these three federal subsidies for home ownership total $154 billion a year. For the most part, they subsidize higher income taxpayers. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development spent barely a quarter of that, $42 billion, on affordable housing for the poor. Renters and most low-income people don't benefit from any of these housing subsidies. And to the extent that they do, some middle-income people do, they would be far better off if we just doubled their Social Security monthly benefit. Because, you know, the home ownership, it was set up as a savings vehicle. You know, that was your piggy bank. You purchase it, you invest in it, you save it, you have it over time, and after you sell it after a few decades of being in it, that helps to be your retirement fund that you need. But it's not really working out that way for many people. And so I'm suggesting that we should really think about either eliminating or certainly reducing these sorts of subsidies for home ownership, and instead putting it into doubling the Social Security plus monthly benefit. Germany changed its housing market in this way back in the late 80s under conservative Chancellor Helmut Kohl. They, like the United States, they used to really emphasize home ownership. They used to have a home ownership around what we used to have. We used to have as high as 70% before 2008. Now it's around 65%. Germany's home ownership rate is now below 50%, and Germany is doing quite well. And they got rid of the home mortgage interest deduction and some of the other subsidies they had for homeowners, and instead put it into other aspects of the safety net that people need in order to live, including elderly and retired people. So, jackpot, we've hit nearly $900 billion towards the $662 billion that we needed to double the monthly benefit. And you tell me we can't do this? I mean, the money is there. You know, I think that if you think about doubling the Social Security benefit for people and how that would give us a stable retirement system for seniors, it also would stabilize our economy. It's a sensible solution to this to the retirement crisis. We would achieve this through tax fairness by making sure that everybody's income is being taxed the same way, which it's not now. That would lead to retirement security, but that also would lead to more economic stability in our broader macro economy, because when you have economic downturns and such, Social Security becomes what's known as an automatic stabilizer. Because, you know, seniors that have this income, they spend that income during an economic downturn. They need that to spend in order to live. And so, I mean, what happens in economic downturns is businesses start laying people off. The fewer employees means fewer customers, fewer consumers. So then businesses have fewer customers, and it becomes a downward spiral. Well, when you have robust systems like Social Security, it becomes an automatic stabilizer to the economy, because during downturns you still have a certain amount of people that are receiving their monthly benefits and using that to live. So tax fairness equals retirement security equals economic stability. I think this is the type of formula that we have to put out there and make the argument that we don't really have much choice in terms of expanding Social Security, because, as I said, the other two legs of the three-legged stool are extremely risky. We know that now. And in many ways, they've failed. The 401k system replacing pensions has completely failed. And it's time to really get away from the old nostrums and stereotypes and ideology and just become pragmatic about what is going to be good for our nation's seniors, what's going to be good for retirement, what's going to be good for the overall macroeconomy. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, from an economic perspective, there's just no question that this is Social Security plus doubling the monthly benefit is the way to go. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. And it seems to me that now is the time. We have more attention to this issue than ever before. We have people like Bernie Sanders, who has pushed this agenda, Elizabeth Warren as well, to the point where even Hillary Clinton now, who historically has not been in favor of expansion. We have to be honest, she has waffled on this issue badly for whatever reason, considering that 70% of Republicans are in favor of Social Security. I mean, there seems to be no political cost that I can tell to being in favor of Social Security and even in favor of expansion. And so now Hillary at least has said that she's in favor of expansion in limited circumstances when someone has to take time off from work to take care of someone who's ill and these sorts of things, and for vulnerable people. But that's not good enough. If she's going to be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party on this issue, I think she needs to be stronger. We need to push her to get stronger. President Obama has not been great on this issue historically. The Bowles-Simpson Commission was his commission, and he appointed 2 co-chairs who were known to be not friends to entitlements. And so why he did that, maybe we'll know someday from his memoirs. But then he embraced, the chain CPI, the cost of living increase that actually would have meant a decrease for people at a certain point. But to his credit, he recently came around to saying we have to expand Social Security. So there's something shaking, there's something afoot. Now's the time, I think, for us to start putting out these bold ideas, saying we're not just in favor of expanding Social Security, we want to double the monthly benefit. We want to have what other developed countries around the world already have. This is not like we're trying to invent something new or different. This is what they already have. And as this exercise shows, there are plenty of pools of money to draw from that I think if we put it in front of most Americans and show them that there isn't tax fairness now. And we're not asking to increase taxes or change the tax structure just for government spending writ large, because some people say, oh, it'll go to foreign aid or it will go to something else I don't support. We're saying we're going to put it into retirement security. We're going to put it into Social Security Plus, which we know the vast majority of Americans from all sides of the political spectrum support. So I think this is the time to push these ideas out there and make the case. And I thank you for your time, and thank you to Economic Policy Institute for inviting me here to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.